Thunder rattled the sky as rain poured onto the checkered floor that once held so much fantasy and fun, but also held a lot of dark tragedy around it. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was closed for a couple of years now. Despite that, the place is left untouched and frozen in time since its closure. That is, until a loud creaking is heard. An old door is slowly opening, revealing a man holding a flashlight and an empty bag. The man was tall and thin, with a gaunt face that is poorly shaven. His glassy eyes seemed determined, but looked dead and pale. The man lets go of the door and picks up the sledgehammer. He points his flashlight inside the building. He hesitates for a moment. Then, William Afton stepped inside. He looks at his surroundings, making sure no one was trying to jump him. The building was in ruin. The ceiling had large holes that let the cold rain creep inside. Some of the tables were knocked over, and most of the posters were torn from the walls. As he looked around, he was reminded of the past of this place. How long has it been since he'd last seen this place? 10 years? Possibly. Then he focused his mind again. He was getting distracted too easily. He has one mission that needs to work, because if it fails, then it's game over. He walked deeper inside the building and went to the main stage. They're still here. Good. He realizes this is the first time he's seen them in their latest makeover. Chica the chicken looked mostly the same, except for her head, and her cupcake is also unchanged. Bonnie the bunny looked much different than his last appearance. He also looked more menacing. William didn't know why, but he liked this new look. He pointed the flashlight onto Freddy Fazbear. The robot looked so similar to Fredbear, minus the yellow coloring. William didn't know why Fazbear Entertainment made Freddy look so similar to old Fredbear. His mind went back into the past again, seeing Fredbear at the main stage so many years ago. He realizes he's distracted again. He turns around and sees the purple curtains and the sign in front of it that says, "Out of order." William chuckled. Foxy could never work properly, not even when he was in charge. He stopped himself from going there. He didn't trust that fox one bit. He sees something in the corner of his eye and points the flashlight straight at the office hallway. He sees nothing. He could have sworn he saw something moving. It must have been his imagination. He turns to the left and moves to the bathroom area. He sees that the bathroom themselves are boarded up. Then he looks at the wall on his left. He puts the flashlight on the ground and holds the sledgehammer with his two hands. He swings at the wall as hard as he could, and a small hole is made, revealing a room inside. He then hits it multiple times until the wall was all demolished. His arms felt weak. He drops the sledgehammer and breathes in and out very quickly, and he coughs multiple times. He didn't like to admit it, but he was getting old. After he regains his strength, he attempts to enter the room behind the wall he tore down. The safe room smelled worse than the rest of the place. He waited a few seconds, then he entered again. He sees 3 old arcade cabinets that were supposed to be repaired, but never did. A few metal pieces on the floor. He looks at the shelves and sees old training tapes. He reads the label on one of them. It read, "Training tapes for spring locks." If only they knew how to actually use them. He puts the tape back on the shelf and looks around. He spots something in the corner of the wall. It looked like a small stain of a dried substance. He ignores it and turns to see something else. he spots a yellowish mascot that lies on the floor. He is saddened by the sight of his old suit. It looked terrible. Holes were covering the suit. The yellow color is mostly turning green, and even a piece of its ear has fallen off. Years of being trapped in this room really took a toll on it. Maybe, when he's finished with his plan, he'll take the spring suit with him and repair it. He thinks of maybe using the suit for his plan, but decides it wouldn't be wise to use an old worn-out suit that could easily kill him. He steps out of the room and decides to head to the parts and services. Surely it had a spare suit. On his way there, he stops. He could have sworn he heard footsteps. He points the flashlight on the main stage and sees the trio are still on their proper place. They look like they're in a deep sleep. He turns to the purple curtains, and it looked like it's been moved a bit. William holds the sledgehammer tighter and continues his walk to the parts and services. When he reached the door, he opens it slowly and checks inside with the flashlight before going in. It seems nothing in there is alive, so he enters the room. He sees a large table in the middle of the room that has several heads on it, as well as an endoskeleton. He looks at the wall and sees there is writing on it. It didn't look like graffiti. It read, "It's me." William ignores the message and starts searching. He looks at the various heads and sees that all of them are filled with machinery that would make it impossible for a human to wear. He guessed Fazbear's didn't want anyone to wear the suits. William got frustrated. He started to smash the heads with the sledgehammer. However, his fit of rage is short-lived as he starts coughing aggressively. He falls to the ground and continues to cough. He decides to take a small break and sit on the floor. When he stopped coughing, he stood up slowly and looks at the mess he's made. He's losing it. More importantly, he's losing time. He decides that today was a bust, and he'll have to take one of the heads back with him so he can remove all the machinery and use it the next day. He picks up the flashlight and the sledgehammer. He reaches for the spare head, but before he picked it up, he feels a cold air breezing against him. He slowly puts the flashlight on the table. His hands started shaking, but he steadied them. They weren't gonna get him. Not today. He holds the sledgehammer with both of his hands. He prepares himself, and immediately swings to what's behind him. Instead of hearing the crash of metal, however, he hears the smashing of concrete. He opens his eyes and sees nothing. That can't be. He was so sure that. But before he finished his thought, he hears a laugh that sounded like his own, but it didn't come from him. He turns his head and sees a shadow-shaped Freddy silhouetted on the wall. William at first thought that Freddy was here with him, but he looked around the room with the flashlight and sees no one. The shadow wasn't casting anything. It was just there. William then knew what it was. He calmed his breathing, but he didn't lower his guard. Two white glowing pupils appeared in the shadow. Then its teeth started to glow. It slowly came out of the wall and took a three-dimensional form. It looked at William. William wasn't fazed. He recognized this creature. Ever since the diner, he'd seen this creature roaming in the darkness, wherever he goes. Most of the time, it appeared for only a second before it disappeared. He would only get a glimpse at it. But this is the first time he got a good look at it. William was fascinated by the creature. What was it? William and the shadow creature stared at each other for what felt like forever. He knew the creature wanted to intimidate him with what looked like his menacing grin. A coward would have ran away at the first sight of this hulking beast. But William didn't back down and glared at the creature. Besides, if something went wrong, he still has the sledgehammer. Eventually, the creature suddenly shifted its body and took one step away from William. William smiled triumphantly. The shadow looked less menacing to William now. Then he thought of an idea. "Creature, do you understand what I am saying?" The shadow nodded slowly. William was fascinated even more. Could he control this creature? "Pick this mask up." The shadow stood still for a second. Then it looked at the spare head. It reached for it, but when it tried to pick it up, its hands phased through the object. It seems that the shadow can't interact with physical objects. William felt calmer as he realizes the creature can't hurt him, physically at least. He wonders if he could use the shadow for his plan. "Can you get these robots to come to me?" William asked. The shadow nodded slowly. Now William was sure the shadow can be used for his plan. "Follow me," William said. He went out to the parts and services and headed for the safe room, while the creature was behind him. When William entered the safe room, he orders the shadow to do something. It slowly nodded and left the safe room. William puts the flashlight on the floor and holds the sledgehammer and waits. But against his better judgment, he wanted to see what the shadow would do. William exits the safe room and peeks at the stage. He saw the shadow in front of Freddy Fazbear. He hears whispering coming from the stage, but he didn't know if the shadow was whispering or Freddy. Suddenly, Freddy woke up from his slumber and looks at the shadow. Then suddenly, what happened next shocked William. The shadow spoke. "Follow me." It sounded so much like his voice, it creeped him out. Then he saw both of them move towards him. He runs back into the safe room and waits. He hears the metallic footsteps of Freddy become louder and louder. Then he sees the shadow enter the room and stand still. William couldn't hear Freddy's footsteps anymore. He peeked a little bit outside the safe room and saw Freddy standing still. He knew the robot's programming still wouldn't let them enter the room. William waited for a bit. Then Freddy slowly turns around and moves away. But before he could go back, William ran at the animatronic and swung for Freddy's legs with the sledgehammer as hard as he could. He heard the crash of metal and fur get destroyed. Freddy tumbles and falls down with a loud crash. Then William smashes Freddy mercilessly with all his anger until he couldn't swing anymore. He drops the sledgehammer and picks up his empty bag and collects pieces of Freddy's endoskeleton. He takes all he could carry and turns to the shadow. He tells him to meet him at the same time tomorrow. The shadow nods, and William takes most of Freddy's endoskeleton and leaves. He finally has what he wants. 3 nights later, one robot was left to destroy. Foxy. William knew that this one would be the most dangerous if something went wrong. In the previous nights, the shadow obeyed William's commands and everything went with ease. But he knew that the shadow didn't like to get bossed around. But it didn't matter. He just needed one more robot to demolish. William waited for the shadow to appear. He was used to waiting until the shadow appeared, but this time it took longer than usual, and it didn't appear. William was getting more angrier by the minute. Then he hears whispering coming from the office hallway. Thinking it's the creature, William goes to the hallway and sees nothing. He looks around the walls and sees a shadow is attached to it. But it wasn't the shape of Freddy. It was the shape of Bonnie. William was confused. He got closer to the shadow. Then he heard a laugh. His laugh. He looked to his left and sees Shadow Freddy. William turned back to the wall and sees that the Shadow Bonnie has disappeared. He dismisses it, and he looks at Shadow Freddy, furious. "Finally!" William said. He wanted to shout, but he didn't want to risk waking up the fox. "I was beginning to think you weren't going to show up. Do you have any idea what would have happened if that damn fox had woken up?" The Shadow somehow looked slightly angrier at William. He didn't care. There was only one left, and he wouldn't need Shadow Freddy's assistance anymore. "Go. Bring the fox to the safe room." Shadow Freddy didn't nod and kept still. "Now!" William ordered again. Shadow Freddy slowly nods and went to Foxy, and William went back to the safe room. Maybe, he thought, after he completes his mission, he could somehow find a way to kill the Shadow. Days later, Carl got out of the truck with his team and looked at the building in front of him. Why the hell is he doing this? He's heard the stories of this place. Why did he decide to do this? Money. In the end, he needed the cash for his studies. His buddy Tom bumped him on the shoulder, and Carl snapped out of it. "Cheer up, man," Tom said cheerfully. "This is gonna be the easiest job yet." Carl still had a bad feeling. "Come on, you two," their supervisor said. "Fazbear's wants this job done quickly." Carl and Tom reached the door. The last member of the team, James, took out the keys to open the entrance, but the door creaked, and the door opened by itself. Everyone was surprised. "Weird. Thought this place was locked," the supervisor said. Carl's worries increased. He waited until all of them went in first. He was the last one to enter. When he entered the old restaurant, he immediately almost vomited from the smell. "God, it stinks in here," James said. "Couldn't Fazbear's give us hazmat suits or something?" Tom said. "Be quiet, Tom," the supervisor ordered. "We have a job to do. We don't have much time to joke around." "Carl, put yourself together." "All right, boss," Carl responded. He then turned to James. "James, did you bring that air freshener with you?" "Yeah, I did," James responded. "Hey, boss, gonna go get it?" "Fine," the supervisor responded. James went outside to get the freshener. Carl regained his composure and went in deeper into the restaurant. He never understood why kids his age liked this place. He was always terrified of the mascots, and the rumors and stories he'd heard from his friends made him more scared of them. Carl thought he'd grown from these ghost stories and could have done this job easy. But no, this place still creeps him out. "Hey boss, shouldn't the robots be here?" Tom said, pointing at the stage. "That's odd," the supervisor said. "Where the hell are they?" Carl looked at the empty stage and started to think this job was a bad idea. "You think people broke in and stole them?" Tom suggested. "Better hope not." "James, where the hell are you?" "Sorry, boss, couldn't find it for a bit." James started to spray the dining area, and the smell became at least bearable. "This is ridiculous. Where the hell are they?" the supervisor murmured. "James, search the office area. Tom, search the kitchen. And Carl, search the arcade and the bathrooms. Trust me when I say this, boys. We don't want to come back to Fazbear's empty-handed." Carl was gonna suggest to go with Tom, but he didn't want to embarrass himself. He went to the arcade. When he reached the arcade, he saw so many old games that made him nostalgic. This was the only place in the restaurant Carl enjoyed. When he went to Freddy's for some of his friends' birthdays, he always liked to go to the arcade and beat his friends' high scores. Carl started his search. As he was looking around, he saw writing on one of the arcades. He was sure it wasn't there before, last time he was here as a kid. The writing read, "She left us." Carl didn't know what that meant, or who wrote it. His first thought was, the person that wrote this maybe stole the robots, but the writing didn't look like graffiti. He continued to search. After a couple of minutes, he came out empty-handed from the arcade. He then went to the bathroom area to search, but before he entered, he saw pieces of the mascots lying on the floor. Carl was confused. He went to check, but a huge stench suddenly hit him like a tidal wave, and he couldn't hold it. He vomited on the floor. Tom heard his friend and ran by his side. When he almost reached him, he almost vomited it himself after what he just smelled. Tom reached his friend and moved him back to the dining area and sat him on one of the chairs. "You alright, man?" Tom asked. Carl coughed some more. "Yeah, can't blame you. This is the worst smell I've ever smelled in my whole life. Someone must have taken a pretty fat shit there." Carl laughed, then started coughing again. "What's going on here?" the supervisor demanded. "What happened? You find something?" "No, sir," Tom said. "You're just gonna need a bigger spray when you go into the bathrooms." "So you found nothing?" the supervisor asked. "Yeah, I did," Carl responded. "The robots. They're all dismantled and scattered all over the place." "So someone did break in. Darn," the supervisor said. "What do we do now?" Tom asked. "James, come here!" the supervisor shouted. Once James arrived, the supervisor told Tom to get Carl back into the truck to recover and to come back. Tom and Carl went outside, and when they reached the truck, Tom went back in. Carl felt ridiculous, but to be honest, he felt relieved to get out of there. Over the next hour, he still helped move the boxes when they were outside. He was glad he was smelling the fresh air, but he couldn't get the stench out of his nostrils. Wherever that smell was, it wasn't something normal. Carl waited for one of his workers to bring out more boxes, but no one came. He started to get worried. It's been more than 30 minutes, and no one has come out yet. Carl started to think he might have to get in there to see if they're okay, but his stomach couldn't handle another puking like that. Then suddenly, the drawer swung open, and the three of them got out looking like they'd seen a ghost. "We need to go. Now," the supervisor said. Carl had never seen Tom that terrified before. "Tom? You okay? What happened? What did you see?" But Tom just looked at him with a terrified look. Eventually, Tom reached the truck, and everyone got in. When he didn't get a response from anyone, Carl entered the truck. He sat in front with the supervisor next to him holding the wheel, but none of them did anything. They just stared. "Boss?" Carl snapped his fingers in front of his supervisor. He responded, "Yeah." Carl knew this trip wouldn't end well if the boss drove. "How about I drive the truck?" Carl suggested. The supervisor looked at Carl and nodded. They switched places, and Carl started driving back to Fazbear's HQ. The supervisor said in a low voice, "I'm gonna need to make a call." Cowards, William thought. If he knew how to move, he would have crushed their heads with his bare hands. But unfortunately, he couldn't move. He was sat, stuck in an agonizing pain inside of his old suit. How ironic, he thought. How ironic indeed. Then suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move. He couldn't move his eyes to the movement, but he didn't need to. He knew what it was, and it didn't take long for it to appear. Shadow Freddy sat slumped in front of him, not moving. William wondered what the shadow would do. End his misery, or put him in more pain, if that is even possible. But Shadow Freddy did nothing. It just sat in front of him. Suddenly, he heard laughter. It sounded like his own laugh, but it didn't come from him. Shadow Freddy kept laughing, as if it had the time of its life.